The United States is currently staging one of the most intense economic and military standoffs in the modern world. Washington is levying massive sanctions, openly contemplating regime change, and preparing for the very real possibility of a nuclear conflict with Iran. If you watch the news today, this looks like the natural order of things. Two nations, defined by opposing religions and ideologies, locked in a continuous battle as permanent enemies. But just a few decades ago, the streets of Tehran looked like this. Women walked the streets in Western clothing, attending universities. The country held democratic elections, operating as a modern, secular society that was completely self-sufficient. The transition from a secular democracy to a nuclear standoff began with a 1950s dispute over oil, a single spark that trapped both nations in a 73-year loop of continuous retaliation. In the early 20th century, the British government controlled 51% of the Anglo-Iranian oil company. They took the vast majority of the revenue, paying Iran barely a fraction of what they extracted. The Iranian public had enough. In 1951, they democratically elected a lawyer named Mohammad Mosaddegh, who immediately nationalized Iran's oil reserves to keep the profits inside the country. Britain faced severe economic losses. They tried blockades and freezing bank accounts, but Mosaddegh refused to back down. So Britain turned to the United States. To get the Eisenhower administration on board, they pitched a narrative perfectly tailored for the Cold War. If the U.S. didn't step in, Iran would fall to the Soviet Union. The CIA launched Operation Ajax in 1953. Operatives arrived in Tehran with suitcases of cash, bribing editors for anti-Mossadegh propaganda and paying street thugs to incite violence. The democratically elected government was overthrown, and the U.S. installed a pro-Western monarch, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The United States secured a compliant ally in the Middle East, and the monarchy collapsed entirely, replaced almost overnight by an anti-Western theocracy led by Ayatollah Khomeini. Then, the exiled Shah traveled to the United States for cancer treatment. To Washington, this was a routine medical visit. To Iranians who vividly remembered 1953, it looked exactly like the CIA preparing to reinstall their dictator. Acting on that fear, a group of Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. The two nations were now looking at two entirely different realities. Americans saw a shocking act of lawless terrorism, but Iranians looked at that embassy and saw a CIA command post, making the takeover feel like a necessary preemptive defense against another imperial coup. The hostage crisis humiliated the U.S. government and destroyed diplomatic relations. Washington severed all ties and began looking for a way to strike back. The opportunity arrived when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran in 1980, starting an 8-year war. The U.S. provided Iraq with satellite intelligence, combat helicopters, and dual-use technology. When Saddam began deploying chemical weapons against Iranian troops, Washington looked the other way. Iran brought hard evidence of these chemical attacks to the United Nations. In response, the United States actively lobbied to prevent the UN from condemning Iraq. The message to Tehran was clear: international law would not protect them. Fighting a US-backed adversary that could use chemical weapons with total impunity, Iran's leadership concluded that conventional military power wasn't enough. To ensure their survival, they needed the ultimate untouchable deterrent, a nuclear program. This is a map showing the delicate balance of deterrence in the Middle East. If Iran acquires a nuclear weapon, these threat radiuses instantly expand. It neutralizes the U.S. military presence, directly threatens American allies like Israel, and forces countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey to consider building their own nuclear arsenals. And it goes beyond military strategy. An emboldened Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz puts 21% of the world's daily petroleum shipments at risk, directly threatening the global petrodollar system that relies on a stable Saudi Arabia. To stop this, the U.S. spent years dropping crippling economic sanctions on Tehran. By 2015, the Obama administration brokered the JCPOA, lifting sanctions in exchange for strict limits and international inspections on Iran's nuclear facilities. It worked. Until 2018, when President Donald Trump abruptly withdrew from the deal, restoring maximum pressure and adding over 1,500 new sanctions on Iran's economy. Facing total economic collapse, Iran's currency lost 2/3 of its value. In retaliation, they simply ignored the parameters of the defunct nuclear deal. Today, they are actively enriching uranium to higher levels, moving precariously close to the breakout capacity required to build a weapon. Every policy intended to stop Iran's nuclear program ended up accelerating their desperation to build it. We are left with two completely incompatible realities. From Washington's point of view, they are carefully containing a dangerous, theocratic regime that funds terror militias and actively seeks to destabilize global trade routes. But from Tehran's point of view, they are merely defending themselves against an aggressive superpower, a country that overthrew their democracy, backed an enemy using chemical weapons, and has spent decades trying to destroy their economy. Neither side sees themselves as the aggressor. Every threat and sanction from one side is viewed purely as justified self-defense against the historical actions of the other. But in this high-stakes game of geopolitical chess, the real damage doesn't land on the politicians in Washington or the supreme leaders in Tehran. It lands on millions of ordinary Iranian citizens. These people just want normal lives, economic opportunity, and the right to choose their own government. Instead, they are caught in the middle, crushed simultaneously by the violent brutality of their own regime and the unbearable weight of American sanctions. And they will continue to suffer until one side is willing to finally break the cycle.